Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Boulder Valley Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. I am Reverend Lydia Ferrante Roseberry, coming to you live from our sanctuary this morning. I'm delighted to be joined by Larry Laverdure, our service associate, by Clara Kelly and Tad Coriath doing music live with us today. And in here with me also are tech ushers Deborah Mensch and Mary Stagpole, and we have Don Price at home, working from home on our behalf this morning. Thank you everyone for making this happen. Of course, the most important people to mention are you, the beloved congregation who has stuck with us during these challenging times of building renovation and move and a pandemic, and my sabbatical. So I'm just so grateful to be back at this time. As I say the welcome words today, I invite you to shift into gallery mode if you haven't already done so, and scroll through the screen so you can see the beloved faces of your fellow congregants and visitors. Because without you, there would be no congregation. You are all welcome here today. In all the beauty of languages, cultures, skin tones, shapes, and sizes that come together in your uniqueness, you are welcome here. In all the ways that you experience and express gender, you are welcome here. In the beauty that is who you love and how you love, you are welcome here. In all the ways you make your living and all the places you are from, you are welcome here. Christian, pagan, humanist, Jew, Buddhist, mystic, Muslim, Unitarian, Universalist, with all the traditions that inform your spiritual life, you are welcome here. No matter how long you are away, nor how soon until you return, you are welcome here. And whether you come with laughter in your heart today or with tears, we welcome you. You are invited to join us with an open mind, a loving heart, and willing hands. We welcome you today. As Unitarian Universalists, we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of all people. We acknowledge that our community is located on the lands that were once stewarded by the Arapaho, the Ute, the Lakota, and the Cheyenne people. Our congregation honors Indigenous legacy and respects the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous people and their traditional homelands. And we do this through our connections to Right Relationship Boulder. We also acknowledge that we live in a time when Black, Indigenous, and other people of color and Latino, Latina, Latinx, and Hispanic people are devalued, violated, and killed because of systemic racism. And we commit ourselves to becoming anti-racist in ourselves and in our institutions by taking actions to dismantle racism in society, taking guidance from and honoring the lived experiences of those who identify as BIPOC, and developing personal relationships between cultures. If you're new here, we're glad you found us and hope that even in this virtual community, you can experience the warmth and the love of this congregation. That's okay, we'll do it again. We light this chalice for the warmth of love, the light of truth, and the energy of action. And now I'll sing our bowl again and invite you to allow the sound of the bowl to draw you deeper into the present moment and into the company of this gathered community.
Good morning. My name is Larry Laverdure, and I am assisting Reverend Lydia with today's service on our second principle, justice, equity, and I'm waiting for technical assistance.
Okay, we're having some form of technical difficulties here. Don, can you please indicate if you can see and hear us? Did you
All
lose
looks
us there
good.
first?
Yep.
Okay, you didn't lose us at all? We're seeing our Zoom.
Oh yeah, no, we
come and
lost
go.
you for a while, but now you're back.
Okay, Larry, could you start with the poem?
Okay. All right, take two. Here is the poem by John Donne, For Whom the Bells Toll. No person is an island entire of itself. Everyone is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod it be washed away by the sea, Europe is the lesser. As well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manor of thine friends or of thine own were. Any person's death diminishes me because I am involved in humanity, and therefore never send to know for whom the bells toll. It tolls for thee.
We get to make music again together, and that is the best feeling. So the words to this hymn are going to be in the chat. We are singing We Would Be One. Please join me. We would be one as now we join in singing our hymn of love to pledge ourselves anew to that high cause of greater understanding of who we are and what in us is true. We would be one in living for each other to show to all a new community. We would be one in building for tomorrow a nobler world than we have known today. We would be one in searching for that meaning which binds our hearts and points us on our way. As one we pledge ourselves to greater service, with love and justice strive to make us free.
Lovely, lovely song, and very well sung. When we began this summer's series of services themed on the 7 principles of UUism, I likened the principles as the fine print, if you will, behind Mahatma Gandhi's succinct formula for spiritual living. You must be the change you wish to see in the world. So as UUs, we vow to make a conscious effort to live into the 7 principles, including today's second principle, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. How can this principle be lived out in today's crisis-laden world, when fear and dominance distorts our perception of justice, equity, and even compassion? As we are keenly aware of late, we, like the frogs in the imperceptibly warming pot of water, are prone to adapt to irritants, unpleasant, and even unhealthy toxic elements in our environment. We exist not only in a physical world, but also a multicultural, democracy dominated by white males. These same white males also sit across a formidable economic empire, which is an aggressive capitalism whose rallying cries are growth, profits, unregulated markets, and productivity. In such a world, it is difficult to imagine we are gifts to each other in community. In this world, corporate giants provide for material needs by enticing consumers with advertisements which rely heavily on hyperbole and often deception. So much so that an industry, a whole industry of fact-checking, has arisen to warn consumers of the perils of naivete. This tendency to hyperbole and the intent to deceive is also ascendant in the political arena, where adherents huddle together in their political echo chambers and espouse ever more extreme visions of the world while politicizing election results, science, medicine, and even recent history. Can the middle hold in such a charged environment? Black columnist Jamil Bowie lamented this descent into individualism in a New York Times opinion piece. He fears its impact on solidarity, claiming that the struggle to achieve herd immunity cannot be a personal decision, but must be seen for what it truly is, a social problem to solve through collective action. Moreover, he continues, if American society has been reshaped in the image of capitalism, then Americans themselves have been pushed to relate to one another and our institution as market creatures in search of utility, as opposed to citizens bound together by rights and obligations. Individuals are left to carry the burdens of life into the marketplace and hope that they survive. This so-called freedom is ill-suited to human flourishing. It is particularly maladaptive in the face of a pandemic. Bowie further notes, much has been made of the anger and frustration many people feel toward vaccine holdouts. Bowie quotes David Frum, a former Republican speechwriter, who said in The Atlantic, the unvaccinated person, excepting those who are too young or have a medical condition that prohibits vaccination, has decided to inflict a preventable and unjustifiable harm upon family, friends, neighbors, community, country, indeed, the whole planet. Bowie goes on to say, I share this frustration as well as the anger, the lies and misinformation that fuel a good deal of the anti-vaccine sentiment. But I also know that anger toward individuals is ultimately misplaced. When you structure a society so that every person must be an island, you
Things will assuredly get better as the weeks go by.
Beloved, each week we remind ourselves of the abundance of our lives and this community by giving half of our plate away to those organizations that share our values. Today, we continue to share our plate with the Center for African American Studies at CU, commonly called the Cause. This new center aims to address the need to learn more about the significant contributions of Africans and African Americans, people that have made in Boulder. Cause will also be a physical space for social connection and a focal point for Black community and culture at the University of Colorado Boulder. Please give generously as the virtual plate passes. In addition to donating by text or check, you can donate directly to Cause at the link now going into the chat. After you have made your gift, we invite you to share in the chat your answer to this question. Where have you seen human compassion and solidarity this week? for the work of this fellowship, bringing love, reason, compassion, and justice to this world, and to the CU Boulder Center for African American Studies, we dedicate our offerings.
I'm here in the sanctuary. Yes! There's Clara's little cheer. It's so nice to have a few people around me, but you are still at home. No! When I left for sabbatical in March, I would have predicted that my first moments in the sanctuary preaching would be unmasked and would include a few more of you here. But I'm so grateful for Clara, Tad, Larry, Deborah, and Mary who are here with me so we can be that team, that congregational team. We are so close to being back together, and there's still so many variables in our mix. The building was buzzing yesterday with this year's service associates being trained and a big crew of folks building our new playground outside, not inside. No big crews of folks inside. And yet we can't gather on Sunday. No large indoor gatherings yet. Frustrations are high. I know. I want this as much as you do. This is an ongoing traumatic event in our individual and collective lives. And we will need to do a lot of healing together. Today, I invite us to step back and explore the whys of our congregation and our denomination's caution around how we re-enter our spaces post-pandemic. The frustration that we're feeling goes back to our culture, and the caution that we are bringing to this is rooted in our principles, especially this second principle, which we will be exploring today. Let's start with how culture influences how nations and groups of people respond to outside threats. Cultural psychologist Michelle Gelfand studies what she has termed tight and loose cultures. Of course, there are a continuum and not a dichotomy, but sometimes putting concepts in stark relief can help explain them a little bit. Tight cultures exemplify order and discipline. Societies with tight cultures tend to consist of individuals who are more attentive to rules, have greater impulse control, and are more concerned about making mistakes. And they have much higher uniformity, even to the point that their clocks on the streets are all set to the exact same time. So cultures that fall into this tight cultures category or countries would be Austria, Germany, Japan, Norway, Singapore, South Korea, and Turkey. Loose cultures have less order. People have lower impulse control and have greater social problems associated with unhealthy choices, debt, and addiction. Countries with loose cultures also boast much higher rates of openness. They're more tolerant of people of different races, religions, and sexual orientations. They're more entrepreneurial and have much higher levels of creativity. Brazil, Greece, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Spain, and of course, the United States tend to be loose cultures. So what determines whether a country tends to be tight or tends to be loose? None of the typical factors actually are a part of that. You might think geography, language, religion, wealth, but that's not it. Tight cultures, it turns out, have grappled with more frequent natural disasters, a greater prevalence of disease, greater resource scarcity, higher population density, and territorial invasions. Groups that are exposed to frequent dangers learn to create a culture where stricter rules are needed to coordinate and survive. Groups that have experienced fewer threats can afford to be more permissive. So what happens when a threat like a global pandemic comes? Tight cultures know what to do. They respond to the threat by tightening up, and people accept it because their cultural norm tells them that's what they're to do, and they do as they're told. Loose cultures? Well, you can guess. Let's see. Gelfand notes that the state of Florida and the country of Taiwan have approximately the same population. Taiwan has experienced 828 deaths of COVID. The state of Florida has experienced 42,000 deaths by COVID. What loose cultures need in times of threat is strong leadership, supporting them to tighten up, alleviating their fears not of what the real threat is, but alleviating their fears that tightening up will be the end of their society as they know it, and that the tightening up is only temporary, and that the better that they can do it now, the shorter that it will be. Now, clearly, we did not have that kind of example in our country at the beginning of the pandemic. Now, New Zealand is a really good example of how a loose country tightened up and has been able to have fewer than 3,000 cases and only 26 deaths. That's 0.53 deaths per 100,000 people, compared to the United States, which has 191 deaths per 100,000 people. Now, of course, islands can more easily close their borders, and we've also seen that as the pandemic has worn on, some of the tighter countries have loosened up a little bit too soon and are now suffering more. So it's not a perfect analogy, but thinking about the culture as a tighter or a looser culture can help us understand where some of the tensions and frustrations might be for us. Because Unitarian Universalists are anchored in this American individualism that resists conforming to social norms. Our religious tradition and American culture are wedded in some ways that are fabulous and some ways that are challenging. Now, while our reliance on reason and science has helped us conform, because we've followed the science, we've worn masks, our vaccination rates are high in this area, and I'll bet even higher in this congregation, although we're never going to ask you to prove it. The desire, so we have all of that going for us, that going for us in terms of being willing to conform because of the science we have. And yet the desire to get on with it, to have our individual longings for community be met, is really strong. This individualism is not only a part of our culture, it's in our theological bones. We come here because we like the freedom of thought and the freedom of expression and the freedom to be who we are. And our transcendental ancestors took great pride in individuals' sovereign rights, sometimes at the expense of the collective. Unitarian minister Ralph Waldo Emerson was the classic anti-authoritarian. And with his famous essay, Self-Reliance, he proclaimed, "No law can be sacred to me but that of my nature." Or one of his even snarkier comments, "Men or people descend to gather." No wonder he didn't remain a congregational minister for very long. My colleague, the Reverend Fred Muir, considers this staunch individualism one of Unitarian Universalists' biggest challenges, calling us the I Church. We've enveloped individualistic American culture, even to some extent invented it. We are definitely more of an I culture than a we culture, both nationally and within the DNA of our Unitarian Universalist tradition. Luckily, when it comes to the pandemic, As a denomination, Unitarian Universalists have counteracted our cultural individualism and our looseness. So let me explain that a little bit. What I see is this could possibly be the first time in Unitarian Universalist history that UUs can be accused of being more tight and more cautious than other groups. Now, why would that be? It's because we're putting our core values above our culture. Using reason and science is one, that's one of our core values. And leaning into our second principle, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, is the other one. Choosing to be more cautious around larger indoor gatherings like Sunday services is about justice. The pandemic has impacted the most marginalized and vulnerable among us, revealing the large cracks in our healthcare system and social net, as well as reminding us of the fear that many BIPOC folks, many transgender folks, and other people on the margins have around institutionalized medicine. And that is based on generational and lived history of mistreatment and betrayal. And so the rates of infections and death amongst these groups is much higher than the population at large. And we now know that, that even vaccinated people can spread the virus, and we're experiencing more breakthrough illnesses. So even if we make the assumption that everyone who is among us is vaccinated, we can still pass the virus amongst each other and then give it to a minimum wage worker at the grocery store. It's a justice issue, our decisions of how we gather. Choosing to be more cautious about large indoor gatherings is about equity. Children under 12 are getting more sick with this Delta variant and cannot yet get vaccinated. The UUA is recommending that all religious education programs for children and youth, as well as any multi-generational activities, be held outdoors. Many parents are choosing to send their children to full schools. That's the maximum amount of risk they're willing to take. And it's an important demographic in our congregation that we want to be careful not to exclude by our choices. It's an equity issue. Choosing to be more cautious is about compassion. The root of the word compassion means to suffer with. No one has been immune from the suffering of the pandemic. And expanding our compassion beyond our own individual losses and seeing the variety of negative impacts the pandemic that are happening with the pandemic reminds us to move slowly so that we can take a broader perspective. We, the leaders of this congregation, are taking the data into account. We are taking into account the impacts of all of this social isolation on our bodies and our souls. We are taking into account the impact on older adults and on families. And we're charting a course for the congregation that minimizes risk and remains inclusive. And that's a tricky line to move through. This is constantly changing liminal space we're in. Liminal space is that distance between the space between things that are filled and that we know and between the unknowns. And for us, we also have the transition into this building, which is full of unknowns. Everything from the doorbells to the HVAC system to the high-tech AV is all new to us. This is the most challenging space to live through and lead through, the space of unknowns. And it's a space where our focus needs to shift from planning to listening and discerning. Boy, that's hard. I have a degree in planning. And now we're being asked to back up and listen more deeply to what we are really called to do and be. Congregational consultant Susan Beaumont writes, Liminal seasons, liminal spaces cannot be powered through. They must be attended to. And the leader must approach the season with a stance of unknowing and wonder. We live our way through liminal space with a discerning mindset, not a decision-making mindset. This can be scary for leaders and others because it requires yielding and a different kind of doing. That's the space we're in. It's a space where we need to anchor ourselves in our values. And with that said, we actually do have a tentative plan. The values of equity and inclusion around the water service are important to us, and we wanted to make that service as inclusive and available to as many people as possible. So on September 12th, our annual water service where we come together and merge our waters and create the sacred waters for our congregation, that service will be outside. God willing, and the creek don't rise, I will add. September 19th, the next Sunday, we will be back to 2 services here in the sanctuary. God willing, and the creek don't rise. 9 a.m. and 11 again. We're not sure how we'll limit capacity, and there's lots of other details to cover. So please be patient. And check your connections weekly, the website, and in the listserv for announcements as this comes forward. Now, all of this is predicated upon how COVID moves through our county in the coming weeks, and we'll be paying close attention to that. Beloveds, this is a hard time on so many levels. Let us remember all the ways that we can and do continue to live our values in these unprecedented liminal times. Let us remain anchored to our UU principles so that when we can gather again in person, soon, I pray, we will recognize that our sacrifices in the name of justice, equity, and compassion have made us stronger.
So I'm trying to imagine all of you singing along at home. So make sure that you're singing along so that I can imagine you in my head and feel like we're all here today. We're going to sing Let This Be a House of Peace. The lyrics will be in the chat. Let this be a house of peace, of nature and humanity, of sorrow and elation. Let this be our house, a haven for the healing, an open room for question and our inspiration. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of freedom, guardian of dignity and worth held deep inside us. Let this be our house, a platform for the free voice, where all our sacred differences here shall not divide us. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of peace. Let all in this house seek truth, where scientists and mystics abide in reverence here. Let this be our house, the house of our creation, where works of art and melodies consecrate the atmosphere. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of prophecy. May vision for our children be our common theme. Let this be our house of myth and lore and legend, our trove of ancient story and cradle of our tender dreams. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of peace.
I now invite us into our time of community connection, our time of sacred sharing. If you'd like to share a joy or a concern, please type it in the chat window, sending it to everyone, and then briefly letting us know what's in your heart today. I have my iPhone here all set to the chat, and I will read aloud what you have shared. If you would like to be able to follow If you'd like us to be able to follow up with you, please include your full name and where you live in your chat. And then Larry will put a stone in our sacred waters on your behalf. Beloveds, even in the midst of the physical distances we find ourselves in, we are still together. Just listening to the joys and concerns pouring in, watching them pour in on the chat, enabled me to see how tightly knit this community is and what a complete gift that is. May we find the patience we need for these liminal times. May we recognize when our frustration comes out in sideways, ways that perhaps are more harmful than we would intend them to be. May we recognize that even in our losses, there may be a space for us to reach out. And in that reaching out, we too can find healing and love. Let us find ways to reach out to those who are in inconceivable situations right now. People in Haiti recovering from an earthquake and then a tropical storm. The people of Afghanistan who have had their country turned around and are living in fear. And all the people who are living in areas where the fires are raging within their sight, and all the losses to people and to creation from these fires. Beloveds, this is a challenging time, and we are together to live through it, to find the places to lament so that we can move that energy of challenge into a place of right action, right living, and justice and compassion. may we continue to feel our connections, as distant as we may be from one another, so that we may continue to remain rooted in these values and bring more of what we want to see in the world to life. May this be our promise and our prayer. Amen.
We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love.
We extinguish this chalice, but not the warmth of love, the light of truth, or the energy of action. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again. Beloveds, as we depart from this space and go back into all the different places of our lives, let us go there leading in love, bringing our UU values with us into the world so that we and others may thrive. Blessed be. Amen. As promised, we have some announcements here at the end of the service for you. Please be sure to keep an eye on Connections Weekly, excuse me, and the listserv and the website for anything about upcoming in-person services. It is a work in progress. Larry and I will be in a breakout room to chat after the service, but it may take us a moment to get there because we have to move to different spaces. And we will be there to chat about this. And I want to make my last announcement is just a huge gratitude to all the tech people for making this happen. If you only knew the amount of work behind the scenes for us to get to this place. So I'm just so grateful, so grateful for the tech folks.